if you need a mental health professional, or if you need someone to help with your physical health, or if I know people that have dietitians or nutritionists or whatever part of your life you're like, I need, or life coach, or whomever it is, like, it's okay to have a team of people to help you. I love positive psychology. And also, I love that sometimes it's really hard for people to get to the positive thinking. That's actually a little bit
Mm.
in the book as well, because if sometimes when you're in a really dark place, to be like, oh, just think positive, it's like, it's a leap and it's
Yes.
hard. I think really I want people to know that there really is always hope for you,
Mm.
because especially when you're in a really dark season, if you are, or overwhelmed or stressed out or whatever it is you're going through, your brain sometimes will tell you things that are not true. So
Right.
just because you think it does not make it true.
Mm.
Uh, there is a lot of hope.
Hello and welcome, Team ET. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you once again. And as you will have heard during the introduction, today we're fortunate to have as our guest Dr. Nekeshia Hammond. She's a distinguished psychologist, executive coach, and founder of Hammond Psychology and Associates. Dr. Hammond is a renowned expert on topics such as mental health, burnout prevention, leadership development, and I feel that we'll probably be discussing many of these areas as we explore the topic of self-care and leadership. I forgot what we were going to talk about. Sorry about that. Self-care and leadership. Dr. Hammond, welcome to the ET Project.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
You're all the way over in Tampa, Florida, in the
Yes.
States, and
Yes.
we're 12 hours apart. So you're doing it tough at the moment. It's late for you. It's very unusually normal time for me. So thank you for
Yeah.
that. I'm really excited to share with our listeners. I'm guessing you probably are as well, but you have a new book that is due to release in September this year. It's called Mindset Training: Conquer Your Mind and the Rest Will Follow. Given that so this episode is releasing beginning of July. So given that we're
Yeah.
still several months from the release date, are we allowed to discuss the book at any great
Oh,
depth?
absolutely.
Ah,
Yeah, for
fantastic.
sure.
All right. Well, I'm certain we'll take the opportunity to unpack it as much as possible to the extent that it applies to self-care. I guess it's not your first book, from what I can gather. You've got several other books out there already.
Yeah, yeah. It's actually my fourth one, which is crazy, but it's my fourth book. So
Very nice. And is this along a similar line, or have you changed direction a little bit with what you're writing about?
yeah, I actually changed direction a little bit. Most of two of my other books were more parenting books.
Mm,
But after COVID and everything that brought, and it was just, there was so much stress all at once. And
right.
a lot of people were like, how do I deal with this? How do I deal with burnout?
Yeah.
So I wanted to write the book, of course, about stress management and burnout. So took a change of direction.
Right. Okay. Well, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I wonder if you'd
Yeah.
mind um, just providing an overview of perhaps what first interested you in the field of psychology.
Yeah. So my initial love was, I definitely knew, even from a young age, that I wanted to help others. I've
Mm,
always had a love for kids. I found myself really fascinated with child development, uh, and understanding that when you help kids early on, which is
right.
amazing if we can get to kids early on, we actually prevent a lot of things, negative things, from happening in their adult years as well. So started off,
Mm,
in that area, and then I found out very quickly in private practice that the world was just, the world of mental health needs was so much bigger beyond my office walls, if you will. So that's when I started getting more into like media consultations,
mm,
public speaking, traveling throughout a lot of different states and a lot of different countries,
right.
and really working on mental health prevention efforts,
Mhm.
which is where I'm currently doing as well. So excited about that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Certainly doing some background review and research about what you're doing. It seems incredible. You serve on boards.
Yeah.
You've been chair of Psychology Institute. I'm not sure the exact name, but
Yeah.
we just mentioned before we went live here that the month of May was Mental Health Month, and
Hmm.
I can imagine how busy that must be for you as a 1 month out of the year. What's it like? Like what is the month entail for you? If you give us a brief
Oh my God.
overview.
Crazy, as you can imagine. Yes, you hit the nail on the head for sure.
Yeah.
I was joking with my husband today. I was like, this is like my fifth outfit change for the day. Just because I was like, went to the gym, went here. I had a live interview, and then I had my mental health moment with Dr. Hammond show, and then, doing this podcast interview. So that's pretty much how my days are in May.
Right.
It is a very busy month, a lot of podcast interviews, a lot of, speaking engagements. I'm at the practice, I'm doing board work. So it is a busy month, but I love it at the same time.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful because we didn't always have this huge focus on mental health and how to better ourselves. So I'm really happy with the shift and what's happening globally and
Right.
having these conversations. So I'm grateful. But yes, it's very busy, very busy month.
I can only imagine. I
Yeah.
I was looking at some of your videos on YouTube, and I see you've interviewed um, one of my motivators, if you like, or my mentors in some regard, Les Brown. No,
Yes.
no relation to the name, but still,
Yeah.
still, I love the message that he gives. I mean, his story alone is such a intriguing one for me, but also one that really resonates with everything you're doing, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And he was just very gracious and kind. Um, to be able to offer his story and share his
Yeah,
story in that interview that I did. But it's really inspirational because again it just goes back to a lot of us have all sorts of things really that we go through in childhood, and to be able to get through the
yeah,
adversity, the things that were said to him, the negative things that were said, of course, and to get through all that, and of course who he is today, and just motivating and giving back and helping others globally is
yeah.
incredible. So yeah,
Incredible
that's
for
great.
sure.
Yeah.
Is it just my impression, or are the number of mental health issues on the rise, or is it just that we're more attuned to the fact that there are these challenges around now?
Yeah, after COVID, actually, it really spiked the numbers, understandably, with
Mm,
depression, with anxiety, because of how much stress globally that we were all under.
right.
Everyone's at a different place, of course, mentally, and different resources, but nonetheless, a global pandemic was
Yeah.
not something most of us saw coming. So the stress is there, and then right now it's kind of like this, well, at least in the US, like the economy and just
Mm,
so many things. We have an election this year. All these things are popping up, and it does. It really adds to the stress. But at the same time, to your point, the good news is that there's so much focus now, more focus now on
mm,
mental health and on making sure you get help, knowing that it's okay not to be okay, and self-care, those sorts of messages, which is really
yeah.
exciting in the field of mental health, so that we can work on treating those things.
Right. Yeah. It's, I mean, as I work with different countries around the world, I'm really interested to see that some governments are even introducing mandates and legislation where they're putting more onus and responsibility back onto directors and leaders of organizations to take this situation seriously and to
Hmm.
really put measures in place that address, let's say, some of the practices that are not so conducive to our self-care, our self.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm encouraged by that, but I'm not sure how wide it is. I know in Australia, I'm Australian. I know in Australia they've brought in
Yeah.
legislation. Um, I think in America they're very very active with it, and probably similar in Europe. Other countries
Hmm.
I'm not so sure about. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really been interesting in my work, in some of the work I do with different corporations and different organizations. Just understandably, there's different emphasis
Hmm.
on mental health depending on the organization. Some are incredible. They're very, very employee focused or very executive
Right.
focused. How are you doing? Checking in, making sure people feel supported, which we know by the research goes a long way for productivity, retention rates. And then, other organizations need a little bit more help in that department and making people feel understood and valued and listened to. So I've definitely seen a blend of that with different organizations.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's jump into the main topic, self-care and
Yeah.
leadership. This is a really broad field, I'm guessing. So perhaps if you're okay with it, I thought maybe we could identify a list of factors that our listeners should be aware of,
Yeah.
maybe even focusing on, and then we can circle back and address them, maybe look at possible prevention measures. Would that work?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I like doing role plays. So if you're okay
Mhm.
with it, I'll be
For
the lead.
sure.
So I'll be the leader and I'll seek your guidance. So
Yeah.
let me paint the scenario. Um,
Hmm.
I'm your typical senior leader, always on, working long hours, traveling a lot, under pressure to perform, isolated, perhaps few close associates, um, feeling my team doesn't really understand the challenges that I face, always expecting me to deliver more to them. And as a result, I've probably become somewhat of a workaholic, arrive in the office early, get home late, take work home with me. And of course, the situation is starting to take its toll on the family are feeling neglected, underappreciated. And it's this negative spiral. I'm not sleeping well. I'm always tired, always stressed. So, Dr. Hammond, I need help.
Yes, extremely common, actually, especially with leaders. And as I was mentioning before, workplace culture also adds to that sometimes of this mentality that you just have to be go, 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 take care of your team, don't take care of yourself, you're neglecting family. So, step one, which is a hard step, but step one is really changing the mindset to
Mm,
make yourself your number one priority.
right.
It's not the easiest thing to do because
Yeah.
depending on how you grew up, how you raised, or who you are around now, there's a mentality a lot of times that you shouldn't put yourself first, or that it's selfish, or you should be doing all these other things instead of take care of yourself. So
Mm,
there's a process to unlearn that first because it
right.
starts with mindset. So it's to unlearn that process and then to put certain things into place, because even with the most successful leaders, there still has to be self-care in there. You can
Mm,
have the long hours, you can travel. I know that life very well. Travel, be on plane, do all the things. However, you still have to implement the self-care in there. But
mm,
self-care looks different depending on the person. So it doesn't always have to be like a full weekend or half your day or anything like that, because that's unrealistic for a lot of people. But it's implementing, even if it's a minute a day. But what it
right.
does is it trains your brain to reset and recharge, which
Mhm,
is critically important for physical and mental health, especially for high driven, high achieving leaders.
mm. So I'm a coach, I'm executive coach like yourself, but I'm not a
Yeah.
psychologist. And I'm wondering, how do you define if somebody like my scenario comes along and they're engaging with you the first time?
Yeah.
For you, you can cross the boundary. For me as a coach, I intentionally avoid looking at it from a therapeutic point of view. But how do you make that judgment call? I'm curious.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times, well, yeah, it's definitely a whole assessment process. So when I
Mm,
am in my office, part of the time I do assessments, not therapy, but assessments. So there's a lot of factors like how long this person has been experiencing fill in the blank. Let's say there's sleeping issues. It's
right.
totally okay and normal to have, a day or two or a couple of days where you can't sleep. What's not normal is if you're not sleeping for like weeks and weeks and months and months. or years. I
Mm.
have a lot of people that say I've had problems sleeping for years. Like that's we're not in the typical range anymore, right? So a lot of times it's looking at, well, how long the duration this, fill in the blank symptom
Mhm,
has
mhm.
been going on. How frequent is it happening? Like when you're frustrated, when you're feeling sad, lonely, isolated with this leadership position, is this something that, just kind of happened yesterday? You feel it once in a while, or is it like
Right.
a daily occurrence, which
Mm.
is more of an issue? So, and also how intense these things are. Because for some people, it's like, yeah, I'm feeling a little bit stressed, but I'm good. I'm working through. I'm functioning. And for some people, it's so intense that it is affecting their work. I've had a
Right.
lot of people tell me that it's affecting their work. Then they can't remember what to do, or they're doing their job, but they're not doing it as well as they should. Like all these things start to happen. I mean, a performance gets affected
Mm.
when the person's heading towards burnout, basically.
Right. That's a great response. And I asked the question intentionally because coaching is such a popular activity these
Yeah.
days. And I fear there's many people heading off to a coach when really the situation warrants somebody with a psychology background that can deal more so with that mental illness or mental health than the
Hmm.
coach is equipped to do. So thank you for that. Let's say in my scenario, I'm still coachable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so you've mentioned, taking that time out as one of the first steps and really
Yeah.
starting to give yourself that pause. What are
Hmm.
some of the other steps you would implement?
Yeah. So some of the other steps are, especially like you mentioned in your scenario, like the family piece. So
Mm.
it's really about having a conversation when it comes to family and expectations, because it's not a one size fits all model.
Right.
It's what works best for your family. If your family feels neglected and they're falling apart,
Mm.
whatever that is that you're doing is not working, right?
Yeah.
We have to change. The issue is though, society like paints this pretty picture sometimes of like work your 40 hours a week and then go home to family and then have dinner and then do this, which for some people it's totally unrealistic.
Mm.
But what is more realistic is to say, hey, I know this season, hey, family, this season is going to be a busier time, but
Right.
maybe the summer we'll have more time, or this season is a lighter load, or here's how we can help each other. Here's what
Mm.
we need to do to communicate better. Like it really takes a conversation. And sometimes I've seen leaders are, with coaching, like you mentioned, able to understand and do that on their own. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's just too far gone and there's just damage that has happened in
Mm.
the family unit, and there needs to be family counseling, which is okay,
Right.
right? And
Right.
and they need to go to a mental health professional and kind of work through some things, which is okay. But
Mm.
sometimes there's a lot you can do at home as well.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, what are some of the signals I would look for myself if I'm coming home, my wife is, I feel the distance is growing, those sorts of things are what I should be looking for, or are there telltale signs when it comes to the family and what the leader is doing?
Yeah, for sure. So some of the telltale signs are, one, well, when it comes to family, well, lack of communication, so not communicating enough, or the second thing is, well, there is communication, but it's very conflictual. So
Mm.
often, like constant arguments, a lot of irritation, a lot of agitation being expressed in the family unit. If there's kids at home as well, they're stressed out because some kids are very sensitive to stress, and they
Right.
know, this particular person is, always at work, or
Yeah.
don't have enough time for their events or whatever it is, their extracurricular activities. But so also having that conversation with the child as well. And then the other part is that for your family unit, like looking at um, not only the quantity of time, but the quality of time.
Mm.
That's also really, really important to look at. So those are some telltale signs to say, here's some red flags. The communication's a little off for our family. The amount of time spent or the quality of time spent is not where it needs to be, right? We
Right.
need to maybe set better boundaries. Like there's a whole list, but I'm just
I
listing the
can
most
imagine.
popular ones
Yeah,
when it comes to family. But it's important too as a family that the family knows, hey, here's how you can support me as a leader. I have this really high stress job. Like
yeah.
it goes both ways. Like here's some ways you can support me in this as well. So we have
Mm.
that work life integration
So it starts with the communication clearly.
for sure. Oh,
We
sure.
in our world today, and particularly in our coaching world, we always talk about self-awareness
Yeah.
as one of our first steps. And
Hmm.
I have a friend, amidst. She talks about self-awareness, setting the intention, and then applying
Hmm.
the effort. Is
Yeah.
the sequence of changing maybe the habitual process or the routines that we're in. How does that sit from your perspective as a psychologist, not only as a
Oh, for
coach?
sure.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Step one is, yeah, definitely always self-awareness or mindset shift. Like is
Yeah.
definitely step one. And sometimes, depending on the person, sometimes it's hard for us to change sometimes as humans. Like it can be hard to make the mindset shift to say, you know what, I need to make some changes.
Mm,
And in the work I've done with leaders, sometimes there's some leaders that's like, well, it's not my fault, like not taking accountability. So that's an issue.
yeah.
It's all my family's fault, right? Well, maybe usually it's both sides, both ways. Like the family can support you more and you can support them more too. So that's typically the case. But
Mm,
step one is definitely, like you said, definitely the self-awareness piece comes first.
right. So one of the things that I'm critical of quite often with colleagues is that they focus only on the self-awareness. For me, it's a double-sided coin. So we need the awareness, but then
Yeah.
we need to do something with it. So that
Correct.
if we look at it from an EQ or emotional intelligence point of view, it's the self-regulation that is
Hmm.
really the where it takes the effort. So
Yeah.
I can be so aware, and I
Hmm.
teach awareness all the time. So I'm well versed in my own issues, but to
Yeah.
do something with those issues, that's a whole
Hmm.
different ball game for me.
Yeah.
How do you work with people to get them to make that transition, to make or to develop the desire to make that transition?
Hmm. Yeah. So typically, well, first is assessing level of motivation because in order to make change, some people are some leaders are highly motivated. Like they're like, I'm ready to take these steps.
Right.
You can teach all day long, like you need to do your self-care. Here's the things to change. Here's the things for your family. Here's the things for yourself.
Mm,
However, if that said person is not as motivated as I would like to be, sometimes then it becomes a team effort. So let's say this leader's like, I really need to get into physical health, like better shape physically,
yeah.
but I can't do it on my own. Well, sometimes it takes a trainer, or sometimes it takes a gym partner, or whatever it is, in whatever way they're deciding to exercise. It takes someone else to help them in that department. And then
Mm,
they say, well, I'm struggling with anxiety because I'm so stressed out at work. Okay, well, maybe you also need a mental health professional if some of the things that you're trying to do at home are not working for you.
yeah.
Right. So it's really a matter, and like I said, I've seen it both ways, and there's not a right or wrong. But I
Yeah.
really want people listening to this to understand we tend to blame ourselves so much, like, oh, heaven forbid I need help with something. It's okay to have help.
Mm,
It's really just okay. Like if you need a mental health professional, or if you need someone to help with your physical health, or if I know people that have dietitians or nutritionists, or whatever part of your life you're like, I need, or life coach, or whomever it is, like it's okay to have a team of people to help you. And sometimes, and those are the professional sides, and sometimes the team means adding in your family member or your friend or your coworker or whomever else is there to
mm,
support you through these changes that you need to make to better yourself and to have
yeah.
a healthier family life, have a better work life. So it's like I said, it's really though the self-awareness, as I mentioned, and then to your point too, taking the action steps, which means sometimes it's alone or having that team approach.
Yeah. Yeah, we talk a lot about accountability partners or your personal board of
Yeah.
directors and some of the
Yeah.
buzzwords around. Um,
Oh yeah.
But that sounds like very much on point to your book. So I think in the book you mentioned
Mhm.
emotional, spiritual, physical, and mental domains,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
I can imagine all four of those elements being at play to some extent
Hmm.
in our scenario.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. And it's really the reason why I broke down the book that way is because it's a more holistic approach.
Yeah.
Because a lot of those parts of ourselves are not by themselves. So if we're not where we want to be physically, let's say with our physical growth, or we're
Mm,
not where we want to be mentally or emotionally or spiritually, they're interconnected.
yeah.
And it's really important for us to move to a holistic model for our mental health and physical health and not
Mhm,
get too caught up in just one area.
mm. I digressing. I'm going to digress for a moment, but something
Oh,
just
for
came to
sure.
mind while we were talking. Um, from the traditional psychological approach, do you also look at positive psychology? Are you looking at that at all?
I do. I love positive psychology, and also I love that sometimes it's really hard for people to get to the positive thinking. That's actually a little bit
Mm,
in the book as well, because if sometimes when you're in a really dark place, to be like, oh, just think positive, it's like it's a leap and it's
yes,
hard. So I believe in taking baby steps sometimes, and sometimes you
right.
can take a leap, but sometimes we just need to take the baby steps
Mm,
to get back to the healing process, which can be difficult depending on just what season of life that we're in. But yes, I absolutely love positive psychology too.
yeah, we in a past life with a group
Mhm.
across Asia Pacific, we introduced a number of interventions
Yeah.
focused on positive psychology, and Barbara Fredrickson and Martin Seligman, and a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
their works, and looking at what they suggested as interventions, and I was
Yeah.
really impressed by the transformation I saw within the people. Um,
Yeah.
Now it's several years on now. It would be interesting to go back and see whether they still have that level of positivity. But
Yeah.
certainly at the time, particularly in that group setting where people
Hmm.
were leveraging off each other, it still
Yeah.
really seemed to resonate. So
So cool.
I'm a big believer, but I'm just
Yeah.
curious
Oh, for
on
sure.
where you are. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you were to meet a client like me, back to my scenario, uh,
Yeah.
I know it's impossible to say, but do you work on a number, like a minimum number of sessions, coaching sessions or psychology sessions, um, to be able to create that change, or how do you look at it?
Yeah. Yeah. So now what I'm sort of moving into with like different corporations is going to be more group coaching model,
Mhm.
which is pretty much defined by the corporation and what they want to cover.
Yes.
But if it is an individual model, I don't personally do the individual model, but if it is an individual model, it
Mm.
definitely depends on the person. I've seen, maybe 8 to 12 sessions is sufficient, and then for some people it's a year or two
Yeah.
years, which is obviously a lot more sessions. So
Mm.
it depends on all that needs to be unpacked, motivation level, if there's any heavy trauma that also needs to be unpacked, and then what are our goals, and do we need to again expand the team, if you
Mm.
will, to
Yeah.
see the results. So
Okay.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Are there any traits or states or skill sets, characteristics that
yeah,
that you would suggest that we leaders try and establish, try and develop,
yeah,
that would help us in this scenario? I know that's again very broad, but is there anything
yeah,
specific that springs to mind?
yeah. Well, two things, and you mentioned one of it before. One, definitely emotional intelligence,
Mm,
super important for
right.
leaders. And then the other part is resilience,
Mm,
because there's just so many things that life is going to throw at us.
right.
It we just, like a global pandemic. And then in the midst of a global pandemic, all of the personal things that you still have to deal with
Mm,
in your personal life and your professional life,
yeah.
and trying to hold yourself together. Right. So really, yeah, I would say the blend of that would be really, yeah, really, really important.
The question comes to mind then, what do we do to become more resilient? Now, that could be a whole
Yeah.
discussion by itself, but
Yeah.
are there any simple steps that we can take
Yeah.
that help to develop that resilience?
Yeah. One of the strategies that I like to teach often when it comes to resilience is to really like a concrete thing to do is if you really sat down, and I know a lot of us are busy, but if you really sat down and reflected on maybe even the top 10 things in your life that you found were difficult for
Mm,
you, and you got through them, and you really stop to think and recognize, like, wow, like when you look at a list and you go, I got through that, like you thought, maybe you thought you couldn't, but you
mm,
did. And
yeah.
reminding yourself of the resilience that you already have, and preparing yourself, it really prepares you mindset wise to know, like, I can get through, because that's a part of resilience, is the even the mindset to know, like, I can get through this. You feel
Mm,
like you're falling apart, you feel like you can't, but when you look at your list, you're like, but I did these 10 things, like I got through these really hard times, right?
yes.
Whatever it is for you that you did mentally and emotionally to get through them, you did. So when the
Mm,
next hardship comes up or challenge,
mhm,
whether it's in the work or family or whatever, that however it presents itself, you can start to recognize and tell yourself, I am resilient, I can get through this. So that's one way, just one strategy. There's a lot of strategies. There's also affirmations. A lot of people, it's very popular now, I think it's all over TikTok. But like different affirmations to train your brain to
yes.
recognize that you can be resilient. Like that's a very, I mean, it has a lot of science behind it too, but a
Mm,
very realistic strategy that you can do. It's not an overnight process, but
right.
it's about retraining your brain to recognize the resilience that you already have within you, and then to continue to grow that resilient mindset.
Mm. There's a lot of discussion out there, at least in the area that I look, about
Yeah.
thinking traps. Having these negative thoughts and the thinking
Mm.
trap that occurs as a result, that then
Yeah.
tends to undermine that resilience. And
Yep.
you put a lot of focus on mindset, and I
Hmm.
guess it's, if we think of the think feel do concept, it's really
Yeah.
about being able to identify when you're having those negative thoughts. To
Hmm.
your point, acknowledging the times perhaps in the past where you have encountered the similar thing and you've been
Yep.
able to overcome it. And
Hmm.
I can make that correlation, or I can tie those two elements together. So for
Hmm.
me, that would work quite nicely. So I think
Yeah.
that's a nice starting point. The other
Yeah.
word that springs to mind when people talk about resilience, that I've read about a lot, is optimism and
Hmm.
optimistic
Oh yeah.
people. And I always chuckle to myself to a little degree. Is that a trait or is that a state? Is that something we can learn to become, or is that something we're born with?
Yeah, I feel like it's both. I feel like it's one of those things where it really is both, because I've seen it both ways. Like there are people that just naturally are optimistic. I believe that I've been optimistic since I was a little girl. Like
Right.
just the positive thinking, optimistic, try to see the glass, mostly full and that sort of thing. But also there have been people who have gone through really difficult things
Mm,
that I've met, and they have learned over time. And interestingly enough, and their experience and the stories that I've heard, because of the really difficult thing, fill in the blank, that they've gone through, they actually became more optimistic about their life,
right.
because they're like, man, I really got through, this really
Yeah.
extremely difficult time in my life. I'm healed, and here I am on this amazing other side
Yeah.
of this, trauma journey or whatever it is they went through.
Mm.
So I really think it's both. I honestly think that it's both.
Yeah.
Probably
Yeah.
debatable, I'm sure. But
Yeah, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I'm often curious because,
yeah,
even as a facilitator, we say, well, become more optimistic, surround yourself with
yeah,
more optimistic people. Yeah,
yeah,
great advice, but how? So yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
probably another conversation. Um, I'm always conscious of the time, but this is
Oh,
such an important discussion, and I'm really happy that we've been able to at least scratch the surface. If there was one more thing that you had to share that you think is really important with our listeners, um, what would you talk about?
yeah, I think really I want people to know that there really is always hope for you,
Mm,
because especially when you're in a really dark season, if you are or overwhelmed or stressed out or whatever it is you're going through, your brain sometimes will tell you things that are not true. So
right.
just because you think it does not make it true.
Mm,
Uh, there is a lot of hope. There are millions of people that are probably going through exactly what you're going through, even though you feel like you're alone. There are like millions and millions of people with depression and with anxiety and with hardships and challenges, just like you. So really remember that there is always hope.
mhm.
There's also a lot of great people in the world who are willing to support you. It may not feel like it sometimes, but there's great, amazing people who can help you and support you.
Mm,
And to also remember to make yourself your number one priority.
yeah, great advice. Is there somewhere that our listeners can go if they want to connect with you or they want to read more or learn more about what you're doing, the great work you're doing?
For sure. The best way is my website. It's drnekeshiahammond.com, DrNekeshiahammond.com.
Mhm. Okay. And I know you have a YouTube channel. I was watching some of the videos, so we'll put links to all of those
Yeah.
in the show notes. LinkedIn as well.
Yep, I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, where I guess it's called X now, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.
Okay, perfect. And the book once again releases in September. What's
Mhm.
what's the name of the book?
So the name of the book is Mindset Training: Conquer Your Mind, and the Rest Will Follow. And it's available for pre-order on mindsettrainingbook.com.
Unless you sit where I do and I can't get it. I tried to purchase it last night. So
Oh,
because I'm in Shanghai, Amazon and different sources like Barnes and Noble don't deliver.
yeah,
So anyway, I will
bummer.
find a way.
I will. Well, I'm going to be sending you a copy then. Don't worry. We'll
That,
talk.
that, that
I
wasn't a
will.
full.
I will definitely do that.
I appreciate it, but it wasn't the intent. Um, the book itself, we didn't go into any great detail on the book. I wonder, is there a message behind the reason for writing it? I know we touched on that at the very beginning, but is there a
Yeah.
message that comes out of the book that is relevant to this topic that we're talking about today, self-care and
Yeah.
in leadership?
Yeah. For sure. I really try to put in very practical strategies. I like to write my books very practically with
Yeah.
strategies to start to implement. But there's definitely different things to consider when it comes to self care. My hope for everyone reading it is to really think about, how do you make yourself your number one priority? What are some changes you need to think about?
Mm,
Reflecting, because a lot of us are very busy, reflecting, checking in with yourself, and starting to make those changes, whether it's physically, emotionally, mentally, and or spiritually.
mm,
Because again, when you do that, you become a better person for yourself and for everyone else around you.
right. Well, Dr. Hammond, enjoyable, wonderful insights. Love the opportunity to hear from experts about things that are relevant to leaders all around the world, and definitely this topic is very much so mental health, something we should all be conscious about.
Mhm.
Last question perhaps is, I'm definitely not qualified, but if I'm a leader who sees a colleague who they feel is suffering some form of mental challenge, what can we do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get that question often. So there's a couple of things that you can do to support someone.
Mm,
First is knowing how close you are to them. So you might, if you're very close to them, you can say, "Hey, it looks like you're struggling in some way. It looks like you're going through something. Here's some resources." That's the most ideal thing to
right.
do.
Mhm,
Resources for whether it's counseling or support groups or whatever it is that you have. If you
mm,
don't know them that well and you're like, that would be not the best way to approach that
right.
particular person, or maybe they're completely not interested in
Mhm,
mental health because of the stigma, mental health treatment, then other ways you can support them is literally being there for them, listening to them, checking in on them,
mm,
and really doing as much as you can um, to make sure that they feel supported, because a lot of people who are struggling with mental health feel, which may be valid or not, because depression lies to us as well, but they feel that they're not supported.
right.
They don't feel anyone cares about them. So to have that is very powerful, that someone cares about me, someone's checking in,
Mm.
someone's listening to me.
So it's that whole empathetic
Oh,
mindset
for
to be
sure.
able to connect with that
Oh,
person. Yeah.
yeah, it is so much more powerful than we know. Like the positive human connection is so therapeutic and so much more powerful than we know.
Mm. Well, unfortunately, our time is up, but we could talk about so many other things here. As I say, we've only scratched the surface, but truly enjoyable. Thank you so much for being on the
Thank
ET
you.
project. Really enjoyed, and I can't wait to get hold of the book one way or another. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, it'll be available. It will be available. It'll be available in September for international audiences too.
thank
I'll
you
make
very
sure of
Thank
that.
you very much. Well, Dr. Hammond, been a pleasure. All the best with the book, all the best with the practice, and
Thank
thank
you.
you again for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so I can pop up in your feed occasionally with a great tip for your ultimate growth.